Hello everyone, this is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, and I'd like to welcome you to episode 60 of This Week in FCPA for the week ending July 7, 2017, the All-Star Weekend edition. This week, Jay and I return for a wide-ranging discussion of some of the week's top compliance-related stories, including the U.S. charges top Colombian anti-graft prosecutor with money laundering. The U.S. Supreme Court may finally settle one of the fiercest debates arising from the Dodd-Frank Act. What is a whistleblower and when are they protected from corporate retaliation? We discuss Alstom obtaining an ISO 37001 certification and ask the question, does it mean anything? We review an article by Jacqueline Jaeger in Compliance Week about the benefits of the FCPA Pilot Program and how they are becoming clearer after two 2017 declinations. Jay reviews the head of the Federal Ethics Office resignation to his position to the White House. At the nearly halfway mark of the baseball season, with 2 games left, the Astros have the best record in the majors. I take a look at how they did this and why in our session this week and in an article today in the FCPA Compliance Report. And finally, we discuss the release of the new eBook by the Everything Compliance Podcast Panel Plus One, Trump and Compliance, the First 100 Days. You can check it out on either this website, www.fcpacompliancereport.com, where it's available for download free, or on JD Supra. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for joining us this week on This Week in FCPA. Hello, everyone. This is Tom Fox. I'm the Compliance Evangelist, back with Jay Rosen, Mr. Monitors, for another episode of This Week in FCPA, episode 60 for the week ending July 7th, 2017, the All-Star Edition. Jay, welcome.
Good morning, Tom. We're back to our normal schedule, 10 Central, 8 a.m., and it's quiet here in the Rosen household as our famed announcing pair, Millie and Michaela, are away at summer camp.
Well, Jay, even though this was the week of July 4th, I thought it was still had a lot of interesting commentary and events happen this week, so maybe we can just jump right into it. In the If Not WTF, certainly the Oops column, we have a report from Dick Casson in the FCPA blog that the U.S. charges the top Colombia anti-graft prosecutor with money laundering. Oops, never good. It was interesting that the case involved the Internal Revenue Service and how the IRS worked with the Attorney General, or rather the DOJ, to bring this case forward. So, when you have a top anti-graft prosecutor charged with money laundering, it's really not a good thing. And so that second thing was, I'm not quite sure what to make of this next one, but Alstom, of all companies, has obtained the ISO 37001 certification for its anti-bribery management system. The Alstom Chief Compliance Officer, Michel Julien, put an article in the FCPA blog about this. And obviously, Alstom has a very sordid history in FCPA enforcement, having now only one of the top FCPA enforcement actions against them, previously number 2. So we now have ISO 37001 certifications with E&I, whose 2 current and former CEOs are under indictment for bribery. Now we have Alstom with a 37001 certification, and rumors are that Walmart is seeking it. Obviously, they're still under investigation. In the FCPA blog article, it said the certification focused on the adequacy of the company's anti-bribery system on something called a European scale, whatever that might be. And I think it's probably a good step from Alstom to have this, but I really have some concerns about the certification process, Jay, of whether it's really just determining whether a company has a paper program in place. It really doesn't, I think, speak to certainly does not speak to the requirements of the evaluation of corporate compliance programs that companies operationalize compliance. It may not even speak to what Wei Chin said she wanted that document to do, was to get companies to really think about the integrated approach of their compliance programs. So kind of from your Mr. Monitor world, anything about the certification that troubles you or you think is positive?
Well, I think that, you had, I would say, a spirited debate earlier in the year with Christy Grant Hart. And I think there's two ways to look at it. One way is it's great that a company wants to go out and get themselves certified. But if there are low hurdles to the certification, to your point, what does that mean in terms of what's the word I want? Operationalizing. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes. How does that? Anyone can. It's like writing away and getting a diploma from a university. So I think, it's interesting if you have Alstom, which is part of GE, and if you have other large entities deciding to use this as a meaningful yardstick. Maybe there's going to be something more to it. I still think that, the answer that we've given on a lot of things, ethics and compliance and FCPA wise this year, is we're only at the all-star break, right? So we need to see if there's going to be more steam behind this. But I think, your questions in the past is, does this standard have any teeth to it?
So we'll just have to kind of see where all this goes going forward. There were a couple of articles, Jay, that I thought were noteworthy in Compliance Week by two of my Compliance Week colleagues, Jacqueline Jaeger and Jill Mont. Jacqueline wrote just an excellent piece on distilling lessons from the FCPA Pilot Program. And in this, she really took a look at all of the declinations, which had been, now I think we're up to 5. Granted, since the pilot program went into focus or effect rather in April 2016, and the last two, or rather we touched on this last week, the CDM Smith case. This was a private company, a U.S. Not a public company. So we had the new category of declination with disgorgement, and this is I think a shift in how the department views declinations. And she quotes Ryan Rolfson, partner at Ropes and Gray, that if there's a reasonable determination of a crime and of some gain by the company, in some way or another, the company's going to have to disgorge that money. So that's what's really led to this new category of declination with disgorgement. But she really goes through and compares and contrasts the all of the declinations, and points out that you have to have voluntary self-disclosure, thorough and comprehensive internal investigation, full cooperation, including the disclosure of all known relevant facts about the individuals involved, agreement to disgorge profits for the alleged improper conduct, enhancements to your compliance program and internal controls, and full remediation. And then she certainly lays out the benefits to self-disclosure as well. So kudos to Jacqueline. It's an excellent article. I hope that you'll have a chance to read that. Jill Mont wrote about something, Jay, that I think is going to be pretty significant for the compliance community, although not in the way that people think about or may initially see it. And that's a case that the U.S. Supreme Court has taken, which may finally settle one of the fiercest debates about the Dodd-Frank Act. And those, a couple of questions Joe raises are, what is a whistleblower and when are they protected against corporate retaliation? It arises from two separate cases where a whistleblower was retaliated against, and one court of appeals held that if you don't go to the SEC, you only report internally, you can't be protected by the SEC. And another court held the opposite. So we have two decisions going in different ways, and it really turns on what protections a whistleblower has for a required or protected disclosure under both Sarbanes-Oxley and Dodd-Frank. So companies, when the SEC was interpreting the law, Jay, said that they wanted employees to whistleblow internally first to give the companies an opportunity to remediate. And if the companies did not remediate or resolve the issue raised by the whistleblower, then the employee could go to the SEC. That position was rejected by the SEC. So what we've had is employees who have whistleblown internally but have been alleged to have been retaliated against. So if the court decides that you have to go to the SEC to get whistleblower protection, I think that's going to end employees reporting internally. Certainly for serious conduct that would rate going to the SEC because they have no protections under Dodd-Frank or Sarbanes-Oxley. So unless a company is somehow committed and makes clear its commitment not to retaliate, but they'll have no legal protection. And my fear is if the court takes a very narrow reading of Dodd-Frank and says only the SEC can grant whistleblower protection against retaliation, we're going to have people who do not report internally and go directly to the SEC. And that will, I think, be a negative thing, Jay, for corporate compliance programs, because you certainly want employees to speak up. You want them to raise their hand and say, hey, this doesn't look right to me. And if they can be retaliated against for doing that, and their only recourse is to go to the SEC to get protection, I don't think that's going to be a positive thing for compliance programs and the compliance practitioner, Jay.
Well, you also have the recent case with Uber, where the SEC wasn't even a thought. And as we spoke about last week, you had one of the most powerful blog posts of somebody going directly to their own homepage and speaking about misconduct. And there's been far-reaching effects of that letter so far.
Correct. So this case, I think, is going to be very carefully watched. I really have no clue or no sense of which way the Supreme Court will go. But if they say that you do not have protection under Dodd-Frank or Sarbanes-Oxley for reporting internally, and you only get it by going to the government, I just can't see that's a positive thing for compliance programs. So, Jay, we had, I think as most of our listeners would know, Wei Chin has resigned from the department and has indeed left the Department of Justice, largely because she felt a conflict working under an administration that she viewed as corrupt. But now we've had the head of the Federal Ethics Office is going to step down. So why don't you tell us about that?
Sure. And I don't think that this is much of a surprise. Walter Shaub is the leader of the federal government's ethics office, and there was a lot of criticism of Trump and his ethics disclosures or lack of disclosures. And this pretty much started very soon after Trump won the election in November. Shaub was appointed by Obama and has been in the OGE, the Office of Government Ethics, for some time. He has a very good track record, and he started on his own tweeting to the president. And what was really at stake was Trump's past business relationships, and that Trump did not want to take his assets and either sell them off or put them in a blind trust. And there's been lots of back and forth between the White House. There's been a lot of acrimonious communication. And yesterday, Shaub delivered a letter to the president that said, the great privilege and honor of my career has been to lead OGE staff and the community of ethics officials and the federal executive branch. They are committed to protecting the principle that public service is a public trust, requiring employees to place loyalty to the Constitution, the laws, and ethics principles above private gain. I am grateful for the efforts of this dedicated and patriotic assembly of public service, and I am proud to have served with them. So the president, in a very, the White House, in a very terse statement, accepted Shaub's letter of resignation and thanked him for his service. So I would say that taken in conjunction with Wei Chen's recent departure, this is a second person in the government who is standing up and saying that I cannot work here under these conditions because ethics and compliance are just being thrown under the bus. So, it's 2 for 2 in the last 2 weeks, and we'll have to see what starts happening. There's a meeting going on in Hamburg this morning between Trump and Putin, and there still is a lot on the table in terms of ethics and compliance and what's happening in the multiple investigations. So this does not look good. And the question is what can the Trump administration do to fix the optics? And probably the subtext that's behind it all is, do they even care about fixing the optics there?
I think I would go with B. So
yeah, do you have any thoughts on the significance of this?
Just another government employee dealing with compliance and ethics who didn't feel like they could work under the current administration, and I think it clearly speaks to where the administration views business ethics. So hopefully it won't negatively impact the U.S. business community too much going forward, but. As for the rest of the U.S. government or government employees, or indeed how we're viewed across the globe, you only need to look at the top to see the tone.
Right.
So, on a much more upbeat note, with 2 games left before the All-Star break, Jay, I'm pleased to announce the Astros still have the best record in baseball. I wrote about today how they achieved that record. It was... They are on track to be only the 3rd team in the last 150 years to lead the majors in slugging percentage while having the lowest number of strikeouts. And they have come to the realization that contact is king. So hitting the ball, keeping the ball in play will lead to scoring runs. And that's what they have done. They've scored runs, they've scored runs, they've scored runs. This is with having 2 of their top 4 rotational pitchers on the DL. So hopefully we'll get those guys back, and we may see your Dodgers in the World Series. How would that be?
Well, it'd be okay if they were playing my Red Sox.
Well, can't transfer your allegiance to the Dodgers for the National League?
Well, I can. I just think in that sense I would jump on board and support the standard bearer for the AL, even though some of us believe they still should be a National League team.
Well, and on this podcast, both of us believe that.
Yes. So I want to be revisionist for a sec. Go back in your Mr. Peabody and Sherman way back machine, and weren't the Astros a bit of a laughingstock team? Somebody in Houston was criticizing the management, people they were bringing in, the smartest guys in the room, and sabermetrics. And was that only 2 or 3 years ago, or am I getting foggy in the Wayback Machine?
Well, I think you're getting a little foggy in the Wayback Machine, but we will note for the record that from 2011 to 2013, the Astros had the worst record in Major League Baseball, over 100 losses, 3 consecutive seasons, 324 losses in the 3-season span. What that did was it gave them the ability to have the number 1 draft pick or high draft picks in the Major League Baseball draft. It certainly brought Correa to the team, and he is one of 5 All-Stars. The Astros have the largest number of All-Stars in going into the All-Star game next week. Carlos Correa, Jose Altuve was already on the team. He's named to his 5th All-Star game. But the thing that actually changed, Jay, was in addition to the FUBAR's missteps and idiotic pronouncements of the owner, the new owner from that time frame, that the general manager, Jeff Luhnow, really changed his strategy. And he had originally thought that by taking simply having his hitters go deep into the count, they could wear pitchers down, and they would utilize that. But they had an acceptable amount of strikeouts, believing that if you had contact with an acceptable number of strikeouts, things would balance out. Well, what it turned out was that big hitters and big swingers who struck out a lot turned into rally killers, and that if you had not so much slap hitters, because the Astros are hitting lots of home runs, but if you have people that could put wood on the baseball, put bat on the ball, and get hits, you're going to score more runs. And if you cut down on the strikeouts, you won't have those rally-killing strikeouts. So they got rid of the players who largely were the strikeout problems and focused on people that have contact with the ball. And that's really the change that they made in mid-course. That when they started out with it was either funny or sad, I don't know which, but they quoted one of the players who was around in 2011, and in an article I read, and he said it was like we were trying to find ways to lose. Well, boy, did they. So they were a laughing stock. But they got a couple of high draft picks. Correa has been one, but Altuve was already there, and they changed course. And whatever you might think of the GM and his sabermetrics, he was intelligent enough to realize that the data showed that he needed to go in a different direction, that what they were doing was not working, and they made that course correction. And now they have the best record in baseball largely because of it.
So can we make any parallels between somebody following a plan that did not work and now changing the plan and now they're on course? Is there any potential that ISO 37001 could be a situation like that, where again you're looking at certain KPIs and certain metrics? Maybe if that program adjusts, that can help companies be successful like the Houston Astros are.
Well, that's certainly one way to consider it, but I think the larger point I would draw, Jay, is that if you have new or additional data and you don't change your original answer or your original plan, you're failing to use a tool, and you're probably going to fail because the new or different data might lead you in a different direction. Certainly, you need the ability to monitor a compliance program on an ongoing basis and use that information, incorporate it back into a continuous feedback loop to improve it. But if facts on the ground change, if you move into a new geographic area or you leave an old geographic area, that's going to change your risk profile. And having the ability to change your risk profile, that is more than a paper program. That's operationalizing your compliance program. And that's where you need to have your program, which is to, as John Maynard Keynes said, the famous British economist, if the facts change, I reserve the right to change my opinion. And when you change your risk profile, you need to adjust your compliance program accordingly. So that's really why a paper program doesn't get you there. You've got to have the ability to take new information and incorporate that into your compliance program. If your risk profile changes, your risk management needs to change as well.
Well, I think that's well said, and I just put that out there for argument's sake. But it's nice to see the Astros performing at a high level. And anything from a publishing and an everything compliance perspective that you'd like to highlight today?
Yes, we released this week, Jay, our second compilation of the everything compliance. 4 amigos plus one have put out Trump and Compliance. The first 100 days is out. It was released on my website, www.fcpacompliancereport.com, available for download. It's also out on JD Supra. So if you want to read about the musings of 4 of the top commentators in compliance, plus yours truly, check it out. It's a great read. It's a great ebook. It takes our individual, what I did is I collected our individual writings, Jay, and put it all in one book. So now we've got 2 ebooks out about the Trump administration and compliance. We had the first one, which was released shortly after the election, and it was not the apocalypse yet. And now we've had a second release on the first 100 days. So we're continuing to fulfill Maurice Gilbert's challenge to us to quarterly report on the comings and goings of the Trump administration and the Sessions Justice Department around compliance. So I hope folks will check it out. It's available on my website, available for download free, and it's also available today from JD Super. So I hope people will check it out. And we're going to be recording another Everything Compliance podcast next week, so we'll get it up shortly.
And we're going to mix it up a little bit. In the past, each of us has taken on a certain subject area to speak about and then rant, but now we're going to do it as a different approach, and we're going to do some roundtable questions. So we're each putting together some things that we'd like to know from our other colleagues, and we'll be discussing that later next week, and the podcast will be up in probably, 10 to 15 days after that?
Certainly within a week.
Within a week. Okay. So should I take us on home?
Take us home, Jay.
All right. So on behalf of Tom Fox and Jay Rosen, we'd like to thank you for listening to the All-Star Break edition of the week that was in FCPA for the week ending July 7th, 2017. As always, thanks for listening and have a wonderful weekend.
This is Tom Fox again. Thank you very much for listening to This Week in FCPA. If you have any questions, please feel free to email them to me at tfox@tfoxlaw.com or j@jrosen at Affiliated Monitors. Also, if you've listened to this podcast on iTunes, we would greatly appreciate it if you would rate our podcast, as it would help in our rankings and also get the word out about the only weekly review of all things FCPA and compliance related. This is Tom Fox. Thank you very much for listening to this episode of This Week in FCPA, and I hope you'll join us again next week for another episode.